So today we're with Andrea Kroeze. She's the training and coordinating director at Touch the World, which is one of our ministry partners that has a gap year program. But what they do is way beyond that. And so when we connected, year and a half, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, whatever it was, had an opportunity to not just talk about gap and where you're headed with that, but also get the story of Touch the World. But before we get into the story of Touch the World, and maybe this all blends together, maybe fill everybody in on who you are, kind of your background, and how you ended up at Touch the World.
Sure. Well, my story definitely does blend together with the story of Touch the World. Touch the World is a youth missions organization. It started out of my home church in Wyckoff, New Jersey, back when before I was even in junior high school. So my parents got involved just volunteering. And then as soon as I was old enough to go on my first missions trip, I think I was around 11 or 12, I went on my first missions trip and kind of really got hooked in that opportunities for service throughout the year, and just meeting new people and building relationships and having the opportunity to really travel the world. So I really grew up within the ministry as a student, and then eventually started leading trips, and then eventually started working and volunteering at the office. And then when I graduated from college, I was offered a position as director of short-term missions at that time. So so I really grew up within the ministry, experienced all sides of it. And then about a year after I had been on staff, my husband joined staff to serve in a completely different capacity, but that's where we met. And then we got married about a year or so later. And then about 2 years later, we moved to Uganda, and we served there as missionaries for 5 years. And we got to both see a completely different side of short-term missions, because now we weren't necessarily the goers or even the trip leaders, but we were the hosts, and we were the ones who were receiving teams. And it was really through our time there that we realized, even though training before mission trips for students had always been a part of the DNA of Touch the World, we started realizing there were still some gaps in what our teams knew to really be prepared to serve. Particularly, we were in a very rural, very poor, very culturally different area than most of the groups that were coming to serve with us. And so we saw that there were some pretty significant gaps just in terms of understanding the complexities of cross-cultural ministry and understanding the complexities of poverty. And so we kind of started developing our own curriculum that we used for teams as they continued to come. We started an internship program while we were over there. And that was about 15 years ago that we still started hosting interns in Uganda. But much of what our gap year program today is based on what we started kind of establishing at that time while we were living in Uganda. Some of the courses and the topics that we were really passionate about and we wanted to bring into the lives of young people. And it took a while because there were a lot of other things that were going on within the ministry at that time, but that is kind of the genesis even of getting us to the birth of our first gap year this current year.
That's awesome. Well, the first time I remember, because I grew up in youth ministry, my dad was a youth pastor, and he had been a missionary kid in the Philippines. So I was, kind of familiar with some of the cross-cultural dynamics from stories and whatnot. I never went when I was younger. But I grew up in youth ministry, wilderness ministry, church ministry, then the college ministry. But I remember after coming back from secular finance world to run Pilgrimage, which was kind of the root organization with the wilderness ministry, having a missionary from South Africa, a good friend now, sitting in our climbing gym in Clark Summit, Pennsylvania, and just talking to him a little bit, because our church from Clark Summit was going to visit them with, I think, 15 or 20 kids, big fundraising, all of that. And I remember talking to him about it and having that concept of this might not be awesome for the missionary and for the field introduced to me. And fortunately, this gentleman he doesn't really pull punches. Like, it was a very straight conversation. But he said, basically, the $45,000, $50,000 your church is raising to send these kids over, it's going to be a great experience for these kids. They're going to learn a lot. They're going to come back with something. I hope it sticks. But for the field, we have to, shut down reorganize. He's like, I really kind of wish from an impact perspective, you just send the $40,000 or $50,000 and we'll tell you how we spent it, and where it multiplied. And that was the first time for me that concept had kind of come into my consciousness that, oh, there are two sides to that transaction. Is not the right word, but that relationship and that engagement. So when we first connected and I learned about what Touch the World was doing with the Mission Center, the mission of that, the purpose of that, and how it works, I was like, oh man, this is really intriguing. And that was, I think, even really before we got too far down the road with the gap year conversation. So talk a little bit about the Mission Center, what you do with church groups and prep for missions trips and all of that, because I think that's really important for, even if you're not doing an international missions trip, from a training perspective and downloading some things that are essential for gospel ministry.
Yeah, I think when it comes to short-term missions with youth in particular, unfortunately, it has become this kind of siloed segment within the church. And so it's only seen as an avenue for youth ministry or student discipleship. Our approach is that we can look at it 100% as youth ministry and student discipleship, understanding adolescent development, but pair it with good practices of mission. And so that's where the training comes in, where we're committed in our training to say, we want to develop you as followers of Christ in spiritual formation is a good part of our training. But we also want to instill in you some principles and practices for good mission, and what that can look like. So we never want to send a youth team to have a great experience, but to do so at the expense of kind of the community that they're going to serve. And so a lot of that comes from partnering really well, like having good partnership and making sure that that partnership is really designed with mutuality in mind. How can both of our needs and our goals be met as we work together? And so I think that's where the training comes in for us. So we do have a training site called the Mission Center. It's in the Poconos and in Pennsylvania. And during the summer, we work directly with youth pastors and church groups, youth groups, where they will come out to the Mission Center for 3 days prior to, usually it's about a 1-week missions trip that they're getting ready to go on. So we do 3 days of intense training, but yet it's really fun. It's an opportunity for team building. There's a huge emphasis on just collective worship and spiritual formation. Usually in those training settings, we have about 60 to 75 students from all different churches. So there might be 4, 5, 6 different groups from various churches across the tri-state area in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, coming together. Many of them are different, maybe cultural churches from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So even the coming together in the training is an opportunity for them to start kind of rubbing shoulders with people who might be different than them, who might sing different worship songs, who might, be familiar with prayer in a different way, and just getting to build those relationships in that sphere. And we also we have 4 main topics that we talk about during that time of training. We talk about God's story and what God's story actually says, and really that mission is rooted in God's story. And then we talk about their story. We give them an opportunity to really uncover what their own story is and how God has been a part of their story. And then we challenge them with tools and skills to be able to share that story with other people, right? Either their peers, but also as they are preparing to go out and serve in various places, either in the US or internationally, how to share that story and have it rooted in the story of the good news of Jesus Christ. And then we talk about culture and we talk about poverty, and we do that in a very experiential ways. So there's a lot of simulations and really fun activities for them to become more used to being uncomfortable as they prepare to engage in a different culture and experience kind of material poverty firsthand. So that happens all summer long. We are booked for this summer. We have about 4 or 5 training sessions that we run all summer long, and just prepare and send these teams out.
So thinking about that, as far as groups come together, training, and that happens whether somebody's doing a short-term missions trip or not. That weekend format is super accessible from a time perspective, easy to fit into a summer for a youth group and all of that. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. There's two things I want to kind of chase. One is the scope of partnerships and network for Touch the World, i.e., where do you facilitate trips and what do those partnerships look like from that perspective? And then two, I want to talk a little bit about you and your journey, kind of picking up from coming back from Uganda and getting involved more with Touch the World at the home office and kind of developing things out on the curriculum side, because there's a whole lot going on there. I just kind of want to peek into the corners of. But first, talk a little bit about Touch the World from a network standpoint. I think there's 16 different international locations, if I remember correctly, something in that scope. And then how those relationships started, what they look like, all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, in terms of kind of our partners, so we're different than maybe a number of other, missions organizations that we don't have any of our own kind of missionaries that have been sent from Touch the World to any of these locations that we send teams to. So all of our partners are truly partners in ministry. They're people that we have just very often just kind of met along the way, sometimes through other people recommending them. We tend to look for smaller organizations or even just like a couple that's doing great community work in their community and is not necessarily used to hosting a lot of teams, but is willing to partner because they realize the preparation that we're doing with those teams before they come. The reality is kind of like your friend from South Africa. Any sort of host or missionary who is serving in a particular community, even if it's within the US, they're taking a risk on inviting somebody else into their community and into their ministry. And there are, unfortunately, way too many kind of horror stories of groups coming in and really distracting from the ongoing ministry or causing harm, like leaving a wake behind them. And that's never what we want to be involved in, right? So we're really conscious of how do we actually help and not unintentionally hurt. Most often, those hurts that can come, right, are unintentional, right? We go in with the best intentions of serving. But if we don't realize, if we don't have enough of the preparation and training beforehand to realize what could potentially go wrong, if we start handing things out, or if we start making promises, or if we don't follow kind of the guidelines that the host or the missionary are giving to us, then it can actually leave a big mess for them to clean up after the team has gone. And we experienced that, personally in Uganda, and saw a lot of other examples from other friends of ours who were like, we're never going to host a short-term team again because their experiences were so challenging. So in terms of partnership, we're really looking for people who are willing to invite us into what they do. When we're thinking and looking for partners, for us, it's a red flag if the partner is like, well, what do you guys want to do? What would be a great trip for you? Because then you have these strange power dynamics that go on where everything is being dictated by the team that's coming in, but yet the team is the guest in that situation, right? They should not be dictating. They should be at the whims and mercy of their host. And so we look for partners where we can establish enough trust and relationship with them where they're willing to say, this is what we really need. It may not be the most, fun or extravagant, opportunity for service, but it's actually what we really need. Or we look for partners where we're able to come to them and say, we just want to join in what you're already doing. So don't plan anything extraordinary for us unless it's a dream of yours and you don't have the resources to do it. And us coming will help you fulfill kind of that dream that you have. But otherwise, we just want to join in the ministry that you're doing, because in that way, it allows these short-term trips to really be a part of something long-term, right? When we come in with our own agendas, then it's really all about us and what we did and what we can come back and boast about and say, like, we did this, right? Or we saw this many people get saved. But the reality is, we should come back from those experiences saying, that ministry is doing incredible things and we got to witness it. And so that's kind of what our view of partnership is. So yeah, we have a number of partners around the US and internationally. I can't tell you the exact number, but the reality is, with our relationships, we also kind of serve in almost like this matchmaking service as kind of a parachurch ministry, where we want to connect to the church and be in relationship with the church, that we kind of get to know what drives them, what's important to their specific church ministry, to their youth ministry. And we want to partner them with a location that is just like going to be vibing together, right? Where we can say, like, oh, this would be a great relationship. These guys would really get each other. And so we do a lot of that, where we're really trying to partner a church where they're going to want to keep going back to that same site over and over again. And we have seen that happen on a number of our groups that come with us this summer. They return to the same location every year because they've established relationship with them. And then we also have partners globally that we've never sent a team to yet because there just hasn't been the right partner. But we just continue to stay in relationship with them, talk to them, find out what's going on in their ministry, pray for them regularly, let them know, hey, when we find that right group, we're going to send somebody your way.
That's an interesting, I mean, obviously, I think most of your communication materials are church facing. If you're doing this, we can help you develop out skills, competencies, capacities, perspective, cultural intelligence, and get you ready and stage you well and connect you well. But do you find that as missionaries and mission organizations discover what you're doing, that they reach out and say, hey, we really could use this, and because we're not built necessarily to bridge that, but man, it would be helpful.
Yeah, we're seeing more missionaries who are serving with long-term organizations, who maybe have that kind of their own funnel and program and process in place for short-termers to come to them. We're seeing them reach out to us saying, what can we do to better make sure that our teams are better prepared before they come to us? And I guess that would lead us into our conversation here on something else that we offer, which is called the Missions Academy. So what we have done with the Missions Academy is essentially taken the core curriculum that we cover during our in-person training, and we've made it accessible online for anybody, any group, any church. And so other missionaries from other organizations are finding us and are saying, we want our teams to go through these courses before they come with us. Or even the longer term sending organizations. Typically, those larger missions organizations have a really thorough preparation and training for any missionary who's going to be going to serve long term, right? And a lot of the focus is on sending those long-term workers, but they might not have much of a robust program for anybody who's going short-term, because they only do a few short-term kind of stints throughout the year. And so they're contacting us saying, hey, could we jump on board with your pre-trip training for short-term missions so that we don't have to recreate something ourselves?
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, because I think and this will dovetail into the next part of the conversation. I think in my experience, most ministry people are in a place, in a lane, where their passion, their gifting, their wiring is kind of out front, but they're running with lean resources and lean bandwidth personally. And so the idea of developing or adding this extra bridge resource, that's a pretty big ask. And they may think, I'm in Uganda, there's things unique to this, et cetera, that I feel like I need to speak into. But at the same time, one of the things that I think is really powerful about about Touch the World, the Missions Academy, is you have a team of missionaries. You have a breadth of experience in different regions. You've walked both sides of it. So the opportunity for somebody to say, I don't have to step out of my lane but I can actually partner, and the resources are very accessible. I mean, not just accessible as in online, but from a price perspective, all that stuff. It's not a big lift. So it's an easy grab and a connection. And at the same time, you guys are sitting there behind it, are ready to have conversation and connect. So I think that's it's a little early, and like it's been out there for a year and a half, the Missions Academy, and you continue to add resources to it. But it's a pretty robust toolbox that is very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're hoping it is. And we're, now that we've, been kind of running things for a few years, we're trying to get more of a pulse on like, what are the things people are still feeling are gaps in terms of training? Can we help create some of those courses for them, and doing a lot more collaboration with other ministries and other organizations who might have a very specific kind of niche or context that they're communicating in, and that we can say, hey, I think the audience at large who's in this short-term missions kind of preparation world would benefit from your content. Let's create something together, so that we can just, our heart is really seeing anyone who's going short term, whether that's 1 week up to a year or less. We want to see them prepared and trained well.
Awesome. So that dovetails into the next step. We'll come back to your personal journey, because you came back to touch the world. Your husband came in. You guys obviously met and got married, and that's in the last 15 years, right? 15 years ago, you came to touch the world, and he came not long after that. You guys married. You were still both very involved with Touch the World, kind of core pillar there. For you, though, personally, you're in the curriculum training development. I know you're finishing up a master's degree here pretty quick, I think. Talk a little bit about your personal journey in that space, connection to that piece, and where you see that going personally, and then even within Touch the World.
Yeah, so I've been on staff with Touch the World for 20 years. This year's been 20 years, and served in a bunch of different capacities within the ministry. And then, like I said, we were over in Uganda for 5 years. We've been back stateside now for the past 10 years. So my husband, Jesse, is the executive director, and then I serve as the training and curriculum coordinator. And we've both been in those roles for the past 10 years. So I think, like I said, one of the big things in terms of me really uncovering this passion for curriculum was really comes out of my own just like desire to learn, right? I just love learning. And so, especially when Jesse and I were over in Uganda, the reality and the uniqueness about our story is we received zero training before we left for Uganda, other than just our regular lived experiences and short-term missions, which was pretty extensive, but like there was no specific training that we went through before we got to Uganda. And so we recognized that we're going to have to learn on the job, right? So we just got our hands on everything we could read, just really reflecting on all of our experiences, talking to other people, seasoned and veteran missionaries, and just as we were learning, we were kind of like just one step ahead of all of the interns that were coming before us. It was like, we just read this book, so now we're going to study it with you. And it was through that we kind of started saying, oh, these are really core essential things that anybody should know before they go, even just on a short-term capacity. And so just started kind of writing those things down, creating some, workshops and discussions that could be had, creating Bible studies, and also just researching what other things were out there. And the reality was, especially once we came back to the States and we're looking for like, what else are people doing for preparation in short-term missions? No matter how far we looked, like we were going to conferences all over the US, we were constantly searching online. We really came up short. Like there really were not great resources. We got every single book that exists out there, and we felt like they just were not robust enough. And so we were like, I guess we should just take what we've started to develop, and how can we turn this into something bigger than what it is that was just used internally for ourselves. And so that has kind of been the journey of us kind of creating this curriculum as we've gone along. And then, yeah, I just continue to learn as much as I can. And yeah, so I'm at Fuller Seminary right now, getting my master's in global missional leadership. May continue education past that. But
I
just
I
really,
would be surprised if you didn't. Well, in that kind of going back to one of the things that I see, I mean, again, I grew up in wilderness ministry. One of the kind of mantras we had is without questions, there's no learning. And I always talk about, the first day you take the group out to the water, put the canoe in, say, okay, here's how you load the canoe. Here's how you paddle in cadence. Here's how you paddle when, weight towards the wind. You kind of throw them all those mantras, and invariably they jump in the canoe and it's a garage sale. Like they just haven't really absorbed anything until they're out there. Then they're like, okay, what did you say about that thing? And for you, like one of the things I see in people who kind of blaze into or beyond what the written, recorded, trained reality is they've run into that and said, okay, there's a ceiling here, and I know that there's an attic and a sky above it, and I'm going to go there and I'm going to help others. We're going to make a skyscraper out of this thing. And I see that trajectory for you, not just in the I want to know, but I want to know how, and then I want to help other people know how, and then I want to mobilize them into calling.
yeah, I think when it comes to Jesse and I always felt like us going to Uganda, we never had a particular call to that nation or that people group, like some other people have callings towards particular areas. But we always felt like it was the training ground for us to be able to train others. And so we always kind of knew whatever we're learning here in this time in Uganda, it's going to be used for something outside of just the scope of, the ministry that we were doing in Uganda. And so it's really a blessing and a privilege to like get to be on that other side now and see how all of those things that we learned the hard way, for us, we're able to kind of pass that along and prevent other people from making those mistakes, or just preparing them better.
So thinking about that trajectory, the gap year came out of that whole pursuit, I think. And you had the Missions Academy, you have your own personal pursuit to mobilize and train. And the DNA and construction of the gap year from a formation perspective, from a content perspective, from a flow, all encapsulates what we've been talking about. Talk a little bit about where the seed of the concept came from, and then where the gap year is at and where it's headed at this point.
Yeah. I would say that the seed of the concept probably came even when Jesse and I were in Uganda. For us, it was like, oh, we just loved working with young adults and seeing them want to really go deeper into the things that we were experiencing. So when we came back stateside, there was a lot of changes and transitions within the ministry and the home office at that point in time. And so there were a lot of more pressing needs that we had to kind of address before we could start some sort of new program. But it has really been kind of, simmering below for the past 10 years. And not just with us, but also with some of our other staff members as well, who really had that passion and desire to pour deeply into students. And so since we've really got other parts of the ministry up and running in a really healthy and sustainable place, it was kind of the opportunity for us to say, could we do this? And we want to do it because we want to offer students a next step. So we have students who they might, throughout their whole, high school kind of career and in their youth groups, they're coming to training every year and they're going on mission trips every year. And then they get to a point where it's like they're wanting more, right? And so the idea of the gap year was kind of saying we can talk about these topics that we're only really just scratching the surface on over the course of 3 days. And there's so much more we could explore with these topics. So kind of our main ethos of our organization is looking at identity, culture, poverty, and mission, those 4 areas. And we knew that there was so much more that we could cover and that we could share with students and equip students with if we had more time to be with them. We're usually only with them for 3 days. So the opportunity to be with them for longer, I would say we have had a few years where we've done like some mini programs, so like a summer long program or an internship program, where we've gotten to kind of test out what is it like for us as a staff to be able to work with students for a longer period of time. And then eventually it was kind of like the right timing for us to say, all right, we really want to dive deep into having really like a whole year with students.
Yeah, that's and two, just circling back to those core elements. You said identity,
Culture, poverty, and mission.
Poverty and mission. When you look at that kind of the 4 corners of those from an educational design perspective, and even when you're thinking about undergraduate program design, the whole idea of gen ed in undergraduate program design is giving breadth and depth to core skills that can then be cross-applied and amplify everything else downrange when you get into specializations and all. That's the idea anyway. It doesn't execute that way in a lot of places. But when you look at that range of things, especially with a Christian worldview that isn't just outward looking, but says, who am I? How am I built? How do I look at the world around me, the people and relationships? And ask the question, what's God doing? And then integrate that into what am I to put my hand to? How does that work? They're not just intercultural, go to, Uganda or Ukraine or whatever skills. They absolutely translate and are powerful access points to that. But in real life, what I see a lot of times, part of the reason we launched Anchor Christian University, and even then, was getting into the gap year mix, was because we historically had gotten seniors in college going into internships and camp ministries, and they were missing not just basic professional skills, but they were missing those foundational elements because campus hadn't done a great job of drawing that out of them in the design. Maybe the design was there and the content was there, but the context wasn't, and certainly the coaching wasn't, unless they went and looked for it. And so I love the way the gap year at Touch the World is designed, because it is formative, but it isn't just internally formative. It actually begins to really delve into that coaching and community and all those aspects that begin drawing purpose into a process or an investment. So just as we think a little bit about that, I don't want to take too much of your time because you're busy, you got a lot going on. But so far in this year is the first full year of implementation for the gap year. What have you seen materialize from, because when you launch something from vision and design into delivery, what have you seen materialize that has affirmed what you've sown in perspective as far as things moving forward?
Yeah. When we were kind of planning out and mapping out what we thought this gap year could look like, kind of from a curricular standpoint, we were working off of a model, excuse me, that we use and we talk about in missions training. And one way that we talk about it is just like when you're reading scripture, what's an easy way for us to read scripture and then apply it, right? And so we use this model called up, in, and out. That up has to do with our relationship with God. In has to do with our understanding and our view of ourself, through that view of God. And then out has to do with our relationship with others and with creation. So we took those kind of 3 categories and said, that's what we want our gap year to focus on, right? So we're going to take the whole first semester and we're really going to focus on up and in. And it's going to really be focused on just that Christian spiritual formation and building identity, right? Identity in Christ. And then our second semester is going to focus on the outward. Like, now let's take these things that we've done first semester and let's start applying them to the relationships outside. of our walls. And I think what we have seen and almost been a little surprised about, I guess, is just how desperately the students needed that focus on the up and in.
Hmm.
The fact that it was like all semester, we haven't even gotten out to serve yet because there's just so much work that needed to be done for them to really understand who God is, maybe to break down some of their like churchy, instruction where it's like you have these simple answers to things, and to say like, no, you're old enough now to really wrestle with the hard things about God, about his word, about your identity, about your past, about the things that you've experienced in life that don't make sense to who you understand God to be. And we're going to dive into that. And that needs to also happen in community, and community is always messy. So there was just, it was just so needed to focus on that spiritual formation. And that it couldn't just be something that like we take 2 weeks on. Right. And it's like,
Right.
okay, checked on, we did that. But it was a continual process. And that has been something that's been a bit surprising, but also reaffirming of the fact that, how we kind of designed this to have that first semester focused on those things, that was really needed. Like they weren't quite ready to go out yet. There was a lot of work that needed to happen kind of at home first.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that with your team, I've really loved watching. And one of the reasons that with Anchor Christian University, 11-6 network partnerships, we focus on staging this learning, this academic process in context, but not just with content, not just with context, but coaching, because that coaching relationship is essential. And you can't put somebody, you wouldn't take somebody who played baseball in high school and say, why don't you be the coach for an NFL team, right? You have people in the process, and your team in particular is superb from a disciple making standpoint, not just in concept, not just in content, but have been there in ministry long term, pouring in, and they know how to step in lives, in stories, and invest and do that in community. And I think it's really hard to put that on a website or a brochure and say, oh yeah, this is the opportunity, because you put a list of courses, you put a calendar, you put, some tuition, there are some details that people need, but it's hard to unlock and put forward the essence of here's what you're actually setting aside time and resource to gain, and here's how it will live forward in all of the other things that you're doing. So we could dive into all the corners of that. I know we'll get a chance to talk. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll share one thing. I think we do have kind of the uniqueness of our program. Number one is designed to be really small, intentionally so. So we have just a space for a max of 8 students, 4 guys and 4 girls. And that's also the size of the living space that we have available for them. So some of that dictates, one or the other. But the reality is we want to have the opportunity to really provide essentially one-on-one discipleship for these students and mentorship for these students as they're moving through the course of the year. And they are actually living on the property of the Mission Center in Pennsylvania in kind of a family style setting with 2 of our staff members who are both counselors, kind of by training, but also have so much global experience as well, an understanding of mission. And so we have this unique opportunity of just bringing the different gifts of all of our staff. So I oversee kind of the academic side of things and, the structure of the curriculum and what content is being delivered each day and how that's being delivered to them. But then Deb and Randy and Bill and Sam, those are some of our staff members who are handling the relational side and the discipleship side and the community aspect, like being with these students in their everyday struggles. And so we get to work together in that. And the beautiful thing about being so small is that we can be really kind of nimble and adaptive. And so even though we had kind of a layout of, okay, this is what we want to cover curriculum wise for this week, sometimes the students weren't ready for that yet. Or there were things that came up that was like, no, we need to pivot today, or we're going to need to pivot this whole week. And we're going to need to keep talking about this topic rather than move on yet. And I think that's the beauty of number one, having the flexibility that Anchor kind of provides for us to be doing the learning in that experiential setting. It's not about necessarily completing all of these assignments or having all of this reading done. It's really internalizing the learning that we're able to do with them. And then just the small size of our program that's intentionally that way so that we can kind of make those adjustments and really respond to the needs of the students where they're at.
Which if you break that down and say, okay, as it really is for a college freshman experience, if we just boil it down to that and compare and contrast to, campus at even a mid-sized university, it is a premium, full contact, mentored, coached experience for instead of paying for the Corvette, you're paying for, a Yugo. Like you're paying for the Yugo and you're getting the Corvette instead of paying for the Corvette and getting whatever four-door sedan you think is boring.
Yeah.
So, and I really think with those 8 spots, I mean, you're talking about the opportunity. Once the story begins kind of moving out beyond just the first year of experience and your students, testimonials and all of that. I think for parents in the tri-state area or even beyond, you'll probably be to the point where you're trying to decide which of this group of, can we boil down to the 8 that God is asking us to pour into this year. It's that special of a construct and experience team environment. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think we're seeing that it's been encouraging just getting kind of feedback from the students after even just their first semester that they're, number one, it's more work than they expected. They're learning more than I thought that they would, but they're also being cared for more than they thought that they would too.
Yeah.
And they're just amazed by the level of, of care and kind of that mentoring, that guidance that they're receiving. And walking through, I think it's important to walk through this time with students. I mean, researchers say that adolescence today is fundamentally different than it was 30 years ago, but yet a lot of our youth ministry practices have not changed over 30 years, right? Mm-hmm. And so we are really asking the question, what things need to change? And I think we have to recognize that maybe 18-year-olds today are not as equipped for the world as maybe 18-year-olds were 20, 30 years ago, right? They need a little bit more guidance. We can't just say, hey, you're 18, great, we're going to throw you in the deep end and we're going to tell you have to do all of these structured things or have this responsibility, but yet nobody's actually shown them or coached or modeled for them what that looks like to take on this responsibility to the next level. And so the fact that we get these 9 months to walk with these students where initially that first semester, we can really model everything for them and coach them and everything so that by second semester, our students just returned back a couple weeks ago and it's like, they know what to do, right? They don't need as much kind of hand holding, if you will. But they transition to this place where even they can recognize, oh, we have a little bit more autonomy, but we also are able to have more self-confidence in our ability to do these things without as much oversight as maybe we needed during the first semester.
Yeah. And that's, we could dig into all the different corners. I don't want to, again, take too much of your time, but I think we need to, not too far down the road, grab another one of these conversations. And I want to talk at that point about what you're seeing in your studies, next step, mission program at the college and graduate level, as we think about how do we mobilize to the world that is changing the way that it's changing, but also broaden those resources, build collaborations, partnerships, all of that fun stuff. Because I think you have a unique perspective on that, and you're chasing that at a pace and in a way that is pretty unique. So I want to get into that, but again, that's a conversation for another day.
Yes.
So, but thank you for taking time, Andrea. Really appreciate the partnership and the opportunity to just watch God work through Touch the World, through you and your life, and excited for the next steps.
Yeah, we are too.
Awesome. Well, have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Ben.